2020 was a tumultuous year. The question we must all ask going forward is simple. What values, ethics, and behaviors from the old world are we going to preserve? And what new perspectives are we going to embrace as we build our future civilizations? This is the New World Podcast with Areez Kaki and Akil Samji.
Welcome back to another episode of the New World Podcast. I'm your host, Areez Kaki. My co-host today, Akil Samji, couldn't make it today due to personal reasons, but he'll be here next week. Our guest today is someone who I'm tremendously excited about hosting. He is a serial entrepreneur, a founding member of the blockchain company Coinbits, which performs Bitcoin and cryptocurrency investing on autopilot. He is also the COO of Wazo AI, a startup that deals with the development of analytics for homes and business systems. He is also the co-host of the Hoteps Been Told You podcast. And I might add, our first guest who has also been featured on the Joe Rogan Experience. So with that all said and done, I'd like to welcome to the show, Mr. Brian Sharp. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Love the intro.
Yeah. Just to clarify, do we call you Mr. Hotep, Mr. Brian Sharp? What is the most appropriate name in this scenario?
Whatever rolls off the tongue first.
Okay, then I'll just stick to Hotep then.
I love it.
So maybe we'll start off with a few things with regards to setting up the context of who you are exactly, and we'll speak about some of your work in tech along with addressing some of the major issues of our time. And we'll end off with maybe your final message to Gen Z in terms of why their generation in particular has a lot of potential to change the world in their image. So first we'll start off with personal background in academia. So personal education. Personally, I wanted to ask you about your academic journey since the beginning of the end of your, I guess, high school experience, because generally speaking, majority of the guests that we've had here, we've featured them as other Gen Z leaders or as other professionals, and we haven't really focused on their point of education. So one of the questions that I want to start off with was, how was your education experience like? Whether it be like the institutional, like government education, so secondary, did you go to college or post-secondary, or what was your post-secondary journey like?
Yeah, so I'd like to start at high school. I sucked. I think I graduated high school with like a 1.9 GPA or something like that.
Oh, no.
I remember it was a few days before graduation, and my English teacher, crazy kook lady, and I was great at English. She's just like crazy. We used to call it Crazy Davy. But she was about to flunk me. So I was like, if you flunk me, I'm going to tell my mom. She's going to come up here and have it out with you. So so she was like terrified of that, this old like white lady. So that was the last class I needed to pass. I actually had to pick up a speed reading class to get extra credits.
Yeah.
So I couldn't even take, what was it, an elective or something like that? But I barely graduated high school. Half the time my parents didn't know because I was changing the report cards.
Oh, no. Okay, cool.
See, back in the day, you had report cards came out on paper. Now you guys get them digitally.
It's a bit tougher, yeah.
So you erase the D, or actually with the D, you just put a little line and turn it to a B. So I wasn't good at school, I didn't respect school. Then my parents forced me to go to college. So I barely showed up. I remember, I had to they had some sort of test when you go on to community college, right?
Okay.
Some placement test or something.
Like a standardized test similar to the SAT?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I didn't take that thing serious. I didn't think anything of it. So I ended up in like remedial math, So I was showing up, I'm in remedial math, and I'm like, why am I here? I know all this stuff. So, I'd show up every once in a while. The teacher asked me a question, I'd answer it and leave. And, so I passed that class with never going to class. Just because I was actually pretty good at math. I was one of the few classes at math and science I was really good at. I'd freaking leave and go to lunch with my friends, skip class. And then I was on academic probation. So I had to skip the third semester I had to skip. Then I came back in the fourth semester. And I tried to take that serious. And at that point, I think I was just too preoccupied with my record label. And like extracurricular activity. Like I wanted to like learn how to play basketball. You know, I was a soccer player my whole life. So I spent my time playing basketball and I got really good at basketball. I used to watch the street ballers come and play ball. So I was doing that. And then we moved. So then I went to another community college and I started hustling when I was there. I was selling like shoes and just hustling college kids out of their money. But I was just more concerned with making money. But I just remember like in community college, like having an accountant teacher and she was broke. Like she pulled up in like some Pinto car. So I was just really uninspired, you know? And then I used to always look at my teachers like I'm smarter than you, you know? I got this really inflated ego. So, you know, school, the only class I took serious was I actually paid my own way to take a marketing certification course at the community college because I had a record label. And people were saying I was good at marketing. You're like, yeah, you're so great at this. Because I was doing a lot of stuff online, social media. I was doing a lot of social media stuff. Back then it was like Black Planet and MySpace. And, you know, me and my team were killing it online, you know? So like, that's where my mind was, like building this empire on social media. And so I decided to get some formal education behind marketing. So I took this certification course and my teacher was a consultant for Dow or DuPont, I forget. And actually it was Procter & Gamble's the parent company for Procter & Gamble. And they had, I believe Tide was the product. And basically they wanted to sell more detergent. So he was the one that came up with the idea. You know, they look at the data, they say it's mostly moms. So he was like, hey, you know, we're going to put out antibacterial soap. You know, they basically don't change the formula much at all. They just slap the label antibacterial on there and sales increase. Right. So I was learning the science of, you know, product and package and price and placement and all of this stuff. And I remember we had our final project. And I was carrying the team. Now, I wasn't used to that. I was used to being the flunky in the group and letting somebody else carry the team. But I was taking this thing so serious. And I was just like, man, this really sucks. So I had to carry the team through that. And, you know, it was just a really bad experience. But after that, it was just like I got into I was actually a server at Cheesecake Factory. And then, you know, I had this great memory, like photographic memory. And I remember a mortgage company came in. It's about 8 guys. And I took their order from memory. And they had modifications to the order and so forth. And everything came out perfect. And they were like, yo, you didn't write anything down. How did you do that? And I'm like, well, I kind of just take a picture of you in my mind and it makes sense out of it with whatever. So they were like, yo, we want you to come sell mortgages. So they hand me a business card. And initially I was like, y'all making good money here. I'm not going to go there. But then I ended up getting fired, which is another story for another day, but some sleazy shit happened. So I was like sitting in my car and I saw that business card sitting there. And I was like, let me give these guys a call. So I gave them a call and then, you know, I started selling mortgages and then I never looked back. I never looked back at school after that, you know, but I was always an autodidact though, you know, where, you know, in 1996, I built my first, maybe 97, I built my first website. Then 98, 2000, I was contracting and building websites for people. And, you know, my dad bought me an HTML book. So, you know, back then it was like, you know, HTML 1.0, I guess. So I was always reading, you know, and always just like self-educating. And so I never stopped learning. Like I always had this passion for learning. I watched a lot of documentaries and, you know, I just always had a desire to learn. And then I was getting into, back in the day was Macromedia Fireworks, which today would be Adobe Photoshop. So I was messing around with that. And again, you know, the social media stuff. So I was just a self-learner, man. And, you know, my sister, she's a doctor. My brother, he graduated. with a bachelor's in computer science. He was a coder. My father was an electrical engineer, graduated engineering school, and my mother got a master's degree in accounting. You know, so I was surrounded by all these degrees, and I'm looking at them all, and I'm like, there's one thread you guys all have in common. You work for somebody else.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was like, I don't want to work for myself. You know, like they're like, go to school, get a good job. I'm like, I don't want to get a good job. I want to give jobs. You know, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I ended up having a photography company and so on and so forth. But I just always had the entrepreneurial spirit, you know, so, you know, me in college never stuck.
Yeah. And going, continuing on that track in terms of personal education and the idea of, I guess, building your own path. We see this being more of the mainstream now, right? It's like you always see sometimes these weird like side news stories when they're not really concerned about anything else. They're like doing some profile on some kid tech whiz entrepreneur who made it out of Silicon Valley or something like that, secured a bunch of funding and is now going on to build like some amazing startup. But like as you mentioned, back in the day, it wasn't really that common. And the fact that even was happening, it was sort of the beginning when people were like accepting the cultural revolution that was happening out of San Francisco, right? This all of a sudden this major shift in money going to Wall Street, all of a sudden now making its way and flowing to San Francisco across the other coast. What I wanted to ask you with regards to actually education today, personally for me, like I'm still a university student, University of Toronto, again in STEM as well, love science, love math. In terms of dealing with like some of the biggest trends that are happening in technology today, whether they be blockchain, AI, healthcare, IoT, there's been this weird sort of conjuncture of like online education as being these weird, like whether they be firms or whether they be educational like institutions that are now offering like online certifications or online courses or these online boot camps. Do you see legitimacy in these in comparison to like the 4-year degree programs? Like thinking off the top of my head, like there's something called like Udacity or the Coursera's of the world, like these big sort of companies, and they're being like funded directly from these post-secondary education institutions like Harvard, MIT, Microsoft, Google. Do you see legitimacy in these in terms of like the way that we might as collectively hold these up one day and say like, if you don't have a nano degree from Udacity, then it's equivalent to like 30 years ago, people saying like, why don't you have a degree from X place or X institution? Do you see that revolution shift happening or?
Well, I don't think it's so much about the certification or the degree, right? You know, I always think about what Booker T. Washington did with young Black men. And his thing was vocational education and then higher learning, right? So kids gain real skills in the world, engineering, automobile mechanic, you know, these type of things, these real tangible skills, where if worse come to worse, you can still make a living without the higher educational degree. So he put it in that order where it was skills and then there's higher educational learning. When I think of Coursera and all these things, I don't think about the certification. I think about you're learning a valuable skill. Whether you get the certification or not is irrelevant. Again, if you want a job, maybe it is. But, you're talking to somebody who I've consulted for over, a dozen tech companies, and majority of them wanted to hire somebody with a degree. But when they speak to me, they were like, okay, we're going with this guy. And there's a reason for that. It's because I had real skills and I had evidence to show that I knew what I was doing, right? I had previous companies that I've assisted and consulted with, and I had the results to show what I can do. So these companies, especially when we're talking about startups are driven by two things, either the board or by traction, right? And sometimes both. You'll see a lot where startups are just trying to get to the next round of funding, right? Then you have some which are more focused on traction. When you have these companies that are trying to reach these goals, they're not really hiring based upon your educational background. They're hiring based upon who can get me to these goals faster. It's much different in Fortune 500. You see, in Fortune 500, these companies have already reached goals. They're Fortune 500 companies. They're just trying to squeeze out an extra penny here or there, right? So when that person hires you, they're on the hook for your production.
Okay.
When things fail with you, or if they fail with you, their boss is going to come and say, why did you hire this guy with only a high school education when we had applicants with the MIT degree, so on and so forth, even though they might think that you're a better fit. The Fortune 500 company guy is going to hire to cover his ass. So he's going to go based upon who's got the best credentials on the resume, so that when things blow up, he can say, well, this guy was an MIT grad and this, that, and the third, da, 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 da. And then the boss can't be too upset at that. Whereas with the startup, they're like, who actually knows what they're doing? Like, I don't care what degrees you got. You know, a lot of people come out of school with degrees, don't know anything, right? Couldn't build a company to save their life. Couldn't build a blog to save their life. Couldn't generate revenue to save their life. Couldn't launch a product to save their life. Whereas you got me, I've launched dozens of products and services, So I think it's about, what can you do? Forget the certifications and degrees. What can you do and what have you done?
And you're saying those two questions are the more central ones that any individual, he or she, should be asking before either they apply, or just those two should be the sort of like North Star kind of guiding lights in terms of how these companies are actually recruiting, or if you're interested in
Forget the companies.
Okay.
This is the North Star for your life.
Okay.
What can you do and what have you done?
Okay.
These are the two things that if you focus on, the companies become irrelevant.
Okay. So it's sort of like going in and out of these positions as being just a sense of like gathering experience. It's more like you're the consistency here. You're at the end of the, do you think that question applies just to people who outright at first are prepared to start their startups, or like the general consensus that I've heard amongst people who are in the tech space, or those whose dream it is to like secure internships in the Valley or with startups, is their end goal is just to have that on their LinkedIn, like I am a software developer, I think it's the idea of the experience though, right? The idea of building some sort of credibility when it comes to eventually securing investment or securing capital for your own startup down the road, right?
I guess. I don't know. My brain just doesn't think like that.
Okay.
Like I get that path, you go and you spend all this time going through all these hoops to get investment, so on and so forth and whatnot. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, why don't you just focus on your own cash flow?
Okay. So generate multiple streams of income that you can utilize to your moonshot project or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah. I mean, think about some of the biggest projects today. One of the biggest projects today started out with some of the simplest pieces of code. Twitter. Some of the simplest piece of code. There's a lot of people, for example, Craigslist. It's a multi-million-dollar company. Like, how simple was that code to put together? Like, they haven't revamped ever.
Yeah, their UI looks
they got a UI that looks straight out of 1990 something.
HTML in the background, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But they're still revving millions. Why?
Okay.
So it's like, find a problem and solve it, If you need funding for a project, you probably don't have a good idea.
Okay.
Look at Gumroad, right? Like Gumroad never needed startup capital.
No.
Never. In fact, they invest in other businesses because they started small with a great idea, solved the need in the market, and scaled based upon revenue. Right? Like, go build something. You got kids who will pop up a doggy website, spend 30 minutes a day creating Pinterest posts, and that'll rev 6 figures. Yeah, it's something a 16-year-old can do straight out of high school. While they're in high school, you can start up a little doggy blog, a little recipe blog, and revenue off of Google AdSense, and grab partnerships. You got people blowing up on Twitch. You could be a YouTuber, I just don't get the mentality of going to ask people for things when, you have the biggest hack in life, which is this device.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can learn anything. You can go work at Walmart and retire in 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. All you got to do is dollar cost average into the stock market. Mm-hmm. Stay at home with your parents. Don't get a girl and don't party.
Yeah.
I understand people have these dreams of working at these big tech startups.
Mm-hmm.
My dream is to compete with them.
Very true. Yeah.
I just don't get that mentality, which is why it's hard for me to give people advice.
I think the caveat to that is maybe some of these individuals who want to be who are young and high performing individuals want to learn from the best of the best. So there's this.
Are they the best?
I guess that's what the gold standard has been set, though, right? Not necessarily like Silicon Valley in particular. Like here in Toronto, we have a thriving startup community, and I think like something that I've been practicing, at least in my sense, for the past 1 year and a half, is constantly being on LinkedIn trying to find experts like yourself. It's not just despite the interview, but really researching these individuals and seeing what they've been up to, replicating some of their processes, not necessarily contacting them at first, but I think maybe the missing piece is like a mentor, like a mentorship kind of thing.
I get it.
Yeah. So what do you say to that? Maybe do you see maybe a middle ground solution as being this idea that, okay, get your stuff together, put yourself in order, and then find your moonshot, work towards it, but at the same time go out of your way to look for a mentor. Like, even though it's not necessary, but the idea is like to go out of your way to look for a mentor that kind of aligns with your values or aligns with some or an industry standard or has set a gold standard in a particular industry for you to go replicate.
Yeah, I mean, apprenticeships are great. That's how you learn. You get to see behind the scenes of things and sorts. So yeah, that does make sense. But when I think about companies like Google and Apple, I don't think of them as the best.
Okay.
I think of them as great investors, right? When these companies see something happening in the market,
they gobble it up. Yeah.
They just acquire the company.
Yeah, that's literally yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What have they innovated?
Yeah.
If it wasn't for search, what does Google create? That happens well.
Yeah. Besides their whole TensorFlow, like their most latest, I guess their venture TensorFlow is literally just a different individual that just gobbled them up, and now they're having these dev conferences every year on YouTube. Like, here's how TensorFlow works, but then you bought that.
Yeah, I mean, Google fails in the cell phone market, right? The only place that they win, they bought YouTube. They didn't create that; they bought that. Then they ruined it,
Yeah.
right?
Which we'll get to in a bit.
Yeah, they ruined Google search. Like, I just don't see them as the best. I see them as being, Alphabet being great investors. And that's why I think of kids that grow and I'm like, you want to be a techie. And I'm like, nah, you really want to be an investor.
They see that sort of projected image of like a cool open source workplace, or like being in like sweaters and track pants and like all that stuff. It's like, I want to be that, but not really. You're not really like you're not a problem solver. You're more like, I just want to be in that atmosphere just to say to others and like, I work here, by the way. Yeah,
it's just like this prestige thing. It's so artificial and synthetic and materialistic, like, I heard somebody that said, yeah, I work for Google. I do community management. Well, how hard is it to do that when you work for Google?
Or like an ethics board, for example, or something like that.
Well, I mean, you just work for Google. You send an email out to a company. Who's going to say no? Once you get that, the hardest part is getting the job and then keeping it.
Yeah.
But doing the job is probably really easy. Because when you're doing this outreach and whatnot to companies, nobody's going to say no when they see the email from Google, when they see the email from Apple. Just having that email address alone gives you power, right? And I think that's what people want. They want that email address. They want that prestige that comes with it. And I'm just like, I'd rather have, at hotepjesus.com.
So do you think that maybe the initial iteration was like if we think back to the early 2000s, like when Zuckerberg and these guys were showing up on the scene, this idea that they were kind of accumulating the capital to one area and really getting out of university was like the cool radical thing to do. And then now it's sort of, you see the rise of these open source websites, like we mentioned before, Udacity and stuff, as educational. And then people are tracing those certifications because they partnered up with those exact same companies. Do you see potentially the next sort of mindset shift as being maybe pursue those certifications if you want the certifications, but actually like acquire the skills, apply them to a particular project that you can see, or a particular problem that you see in the world, apply that, test it out over and over again, and then I guess build your brand up from there. And maybe part of it also has to do with building the branding part, which I think some people miss, because it's sometimes I feel there's a disconnect. There are some people who are really strong in terms of the actual like building the tech, everything else in between, except for the marketing part, to get their name out there, to get traction either for their startup, for their product, whether it be just an MVP. There's that struggling session. Do you think that?
I don't really like pontificating on things that are mathematically already proven.
Okay.
It's mathematically already proven that certification industry is growing and will grow and boom, right? There's tons of studies on that stuff. Mm-hmm. We know that. The question is, are you going for the certification or are you going for the skill?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If you're going for the certification, you're essentially wasting your time. Mm-hmm. You need to go for the skill. You need to go to learn. Mm-hmm. Like I've bought courses from Coursera and marketing courses. I remember one time I spent $2,500 on a marketing course I bought from Neil Patel. Mm-hmm. And this is at a time where, I probably knew 95% of what was in this course. I just wanted more, right? And more knowledge and more information just to see what I was missing. I took this course and he introduced me to one book that changed my life. Mm-hmm. So I spent $2,500 to discover a $20 book. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that $20 book has made me well over six figures and counting. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It gave me like this real skill. Mm-hmm. So, I and I didn't even finish the course. You know what I mean? I got courses where, it was like design apps. And I'd run through the course with no desire to design apps. I just want to see how it works. Okay. Right. Mm-hmm. So I was buying these things for knowledge. I wasn't buying them, for the certification, so to speak.
Okay. I see.
Like there was a Google Analytics course I took just to get the certification. Right. But really, I had more fun learning how to use Google Analytics at an extended, knowledge level. Mm-hmm. I just don't get why people do all these things. Well, I get it. It just doesn't resonate with me. Mm. There's no badges I have. I don't have any badges. I don't have any certifications. I don't have any degrees. Mm-hmm. But I made it to Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
I got cash flow. Mm-hmm. I invest and I have 3 tech companies.
Yeah.
Like, why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Because I focused on the real things in life. Mm-hmm. And that was, first of all, building my empire. Mm-hmm. Like, why would I go work to build somebody else's empire? You spend 4 years in college. That 4 years in college, you could just spend building your empire. Like I know people who are journalists and they spend all this time writing on other people's websites. Now, the funny thing is they've got Twitter accounts of like 50,000, 20,000, 30,000, and they go viral every day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're building this other person's blog, but you're the influencer. Mm-hmm. Put your name.com and you build out the website and you grow your brand. And in 4 years, you can hire writers. Mm-hmm. I had my own blog, my own entertainment blog, right? So to show you how we hacking, mm-hmm. I was a touring artist. And one of the things I want to do was get more eyes on my music. So I started an entertainment blog. Well, at this peak of the entertainment blog, I had 7 writers for me. I was working for 50 Cent and I was just buying them computers just so they had something to work off of, and funding the operation. After a while, I wasn't even running it anymore. But the first 2 years, I was blogging all day long. I was blogging my ass off. If a story hit at 2 a.m., I hopped out of bed and blogged the story at 2 a.m. just to be the first, right? Mm-hmm. So I grinded to build my own property. It's the internet. The internet is the new real estate. So like, where's your web property and where does it rank amongst everything else? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I built one of the fastest growing movements on the internet, Hotep Nation. you know, like with the help of the homies, you know, and it's like, what team did you build? You know, like to say I did it by myself would be a lie. Like I said, my entertainment blog got a team. With Hotep Nation, we have a team. You know, what team did you put together? What property have you created? Why are you trying to be in somebody else's empire when you can build your own? You know, that never stuck with me ever even as a kid. That's why I didn't go to college, because it just didn't none of that stuff made sense.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. Definitely was a big help in terms of clarifying, or let's say clearing the air around the misconceptions with regards to an emerging tech industry. Shifting gears, I wanted to talk to you. You mentioned 50 Cent. I want to talk to you about your time working in Hollywood and how that transition kind of was made. So you said that you started up this blog, this entertainment blog, and then over time you grew. Was this prior to you entering tech? I'm presuming.
Wait, say that again?
Was your journey into Hollywood and working then prior to your time entering tech?
Yeah.
And this was starting off with the blog per se, right? This is
So I was I had my own record label. I was funding that by selling mortgages. The mortgage industry died. My artist got incarcerated. I had to start back over from zero.
And this was 2008?
This is 2008. So the mortgage industry died. My artist got incarcerated. So I didn't have a record label anymore, because without a record artist, you don't have a record label. And I didn't have income anymore. So I was back to square one. So I ended up becoming a touring artist. I was like, I'm going to be the artist myself. You know, my homie asked me to join in a group, and we did that. So we became touring artists. So at the same time, I started the blog. Now, prior to this, I had a photography company. So I had camera. So I had the camera guy walking around with us. So we were publishing content on social media. So we were growing really big on social media. Then I get the entertainment blog. The entertainment blog blows up, and now I'm getting invited to events because I'm media, right? So then I get the 50 Cent gig. Now the 50 Cent gig is in consumer packaged goods. After I start to slowly leave that, I start consulting for other consumer packaged goods. But I realized, like, it just was too slow of an industry. You know, tech was faster.
Yeah.
So because I was speaking to investors and celebrities, I was asking them, like, yo, do you want to move into mobile apps? Like, that's the future. Mobile apps is the future. So it's like 2011, 2012, right? Before the big explosion of mobile apps. And everybody was like, no. So I was like, all right, screw this. I'm going to go find my way. So I applied for a job and I didn't get it. First time in my life I applied for a job and didn't get it. So I was really dejected, but it was because I didn't understand any of the questions. So I went on the internet and built up all these digital marketing skills, studied for a year straight, like crazy, right? And by the time I pop out the other end, I'm an expert because I've consumed so much information and bought so many courses. So now I'm like reaching out to tech startups like, hey, do you need help? I understand traditional and digital marketing because I come from both worlds. So I start building my experience working on other people's apps. You do that a whole bunch of times. I worked for an agency, simultaneously consulting for other companies. You do that a lot. And I was just building skills. But it got to the point where, I wasn't getting credit for my work. And my value wasn't being seen. For example, I remember I was working at this one startup and small tech startup in New York City, Rockefeller Center, rich chick. Her dad was funding the whole operation. 3-month contract. So I had to make it really rock. At the second month, I made a tweet go viral and we had the most downloads, 757 downloads, something like that overnight. I come in the office the next day feeling like the man, you know, and she's like, what happened? I'm like, oh, I made this tweet go viral. And, you know, because the Twitter account was optimized, we got a lot of downloads. And she's going to say to me, no, that can't be it. Spend some time finding out what caused that. And I'm like, you don't see the correlation between this viral tweet and this? So I was like, all right, screw it. So we ended that contract. I had another contract later on with a gaming company, and they didn't have the pixels installed to track purchase conversions. So we were spending $2,500 a day. We had a negative 90 something ROI on every single campaign. He's asking me why. And I'm like, you need these pixels to install so Facebook can pick that up and we can run purchase conversions. The developer didn't want to do that. He said, we got to wait till we push out the new version, then we'll do that. They push out the new version, app goes viral overnight. All types of money comes flowing in, thousands of dollars pouring in, thinking they made like $30,000 overnight. So I walk in the office feeling like the man because they finally executed what I told them to do. And they're like, no, that can't be it. So I started seeing that trend. And I'm like, okay, I see what's going on here. So now I realize I need to be a partner and an equity, because when these apps explode, these guys are going to get rich and I'm still going to be a little salary bitch. I'm not cool with that. So I changed my focus into becoming an investor. And so I just focused on my cash flow. I focused on Hotep Nation. And then at the same time, solicited startups to become an advisor and join the board. Okay. And coming in that way instead of coming in like a worker. So that's how I got into tech.
Okay. And just quickly going back to Hollywood, besides 50 Cent, what were some other like celebrity projects that you were working on, and who were you working with on the ground in particular with them? What were some of these projects, or if there are any like hallmark big kind of like times or big project that you've worked on? What were some of those?
Carmelo Anthony is one. I can't name some of the TV figures because of NDAs.
Yeah. Okay.
But TV, BET personalities. Okay. Mostly brand consulting, like how they should operate as a brand, as a personal brand, that type of stuff. But not too much Hollywood, mostly music.
Okay, cool.
Mostly music artists, yeah. Cool. And TV and music, yeah. But not too much of that, it wasn't too much of that. Like I said, I was working with them and I was like, hey, let's move into apps. And nobody got it, right? Everybody's like, no, I want to put out a soft drink. I want to put out an energy drink. I want to put out, protein bars. And I was just like, nah, you want to put out an app. You want to do software. This is what you want to do. This is where the money's at. It's faster. It's bigger. It's more lucrative. And people weren't getting that. So I had to leave that. I had to cut ties. And plus, there's a lot of ego and insecurities with celebrities.
Okay, interesting. And so I want to move on to some of your companies. So your current blockchain company, Coinbits, how did that come out? To kind of build some context around that, the idea of like blockchain essentially becoming more and more mainstream since like the past decade, as being people who like now own a Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency as being, the right thing to do because I'm protected against the markets or whatever the case may be. Did you what your first encounter with blockchain, was it like another iteration of the same startup, or were you paying attention to blockchain as being a rising industry at the same time as this mobile industry was rising, or was it like a later kind of epiphany moment where you found out, okay, like the software industry is kind of like flattening and this blockchain technology hasn't even reached its inflection point, all we have is a white paper from Satoshi, and we sort of have these kind of small fringe groups outside of San Francisco really working on some of these projects? But Ethereum, was it like when Ethereum wasn't out yet? Like, was your exposure to blockchain like prior to that?
Nah, Ethereum was out when I got in.
Okay.
Yeah, I was, I come from a traditional stock market investing background, right? So that was something I would say I knew somewhere in between intermediate and expert, right? Definitely not expert, but something I understood, at least from an investing strategy perspective, how to dollar cost average, how to pick stocks, how to read charts. So, and the history of the stock market. So when I saw this whole crypto thing happening, I think it was 2017, I got in like really low, somewhere in the hundreds, these things were valued at. I was really just studying, not so much the technology, just studying the idea of investing in these things. I saw all my friends were making money off of these ICOs, pumping and dumping. And that just went against my traditional investing background. So I didn't touch that. I was just like, I'm just going to dollar cost average and keep buying these things and then, sell at the top. So I sold at the top, I believe it was 2017, right before the crash of 2018. So when I announced that I was going to sell at the top, people were like, "Oh, you're crazy! It's still going to go up." And I'm like, "Well, I come from a traditional investment background, and when you're up 1,000%, you get out, right? Gains are gains are gains."
Mhm.
So I felt like really macho knowing that I got out before the crash, right? The following year crash.
Mhm.
But remember when I told you I applied for that job and I didn't get it with that software company, right? Well, I still connected with the founder of that company on LinkedIn. So I saw he launched a Bitcoin company. Now, in the meantime, I have immersed myself in this world of Bitcoin and started to understand the community, their language, how they thought, not so much the technology. I just want to understand the people,
The
more
culture,
of
kind of.
the culture. Yeah. So we had a couple of talks, and then I became an equity partner, and it's been on ever since.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of like, sort of, I want to shift gears in terms of blockchain as sort of like a general concept. I think, as we mentioned prior, that's this idea that blockchain kind of became more mainstream in the past. I was since before the crash of 2017, because everyone wanted to get in on this massive bubble. I was assuming that everyone wanted to just keep on pushing and pumping money and artificially kind of raising the prices up, because this was the next lucrative thing to get into. Um, in terms of as you being someone who is involved in a blockchain startup, despite just being the crypto sort of application of it, in terms of blockchain as a more bigger technology, um, two scenarios. One is 2008 and sort of the big bang crash. This idea that that was sort of the start of the crypto application of blockchain in terms of, people, whether it be middle class America or just I would say the entire world. I remember when I was just like a kid and my dad's got screwed over because of what happened in 2008. But in general, this idea that the banks were too big to fail and this entirely came crashing down, this massive centralization of power in one building around all the nations of the world and capitals of the world, that leading to the creation of the crypto market, which essentially is like a decentralized currency with no central bank, no one to dictate interest rates, and no one just massively with one signature letting the printing machine go like insane. What do you see the next iteration of the blockchain technology being? And I want to relate that more so to more current events. And as you mentioned, we spoke prior about YouTube really taking a weird turn ever since their first iteration of their product to now, as being, whether it be the whole phenomenon around the censorship of videos or the so-called the monetization policies. Do you see do you see blockchain's next iteration being the building, or the at least the infancies of Web 3.0, the decentralized internet, or the alternative tech revolution, in comparison to some of these social medias, particularly what we saw in the past like 4 to 5 years, and especially like this last month or so? Do you see that being an area in which not only being lucrative, but somewhere where you can kind of see the market headed?
No,
No,
no.
not at all.
For the internet?
Yeah, like as
Do you
in,
think, let me ask you this, because you probably know better than me.
okay,
What moves faster, blockchain or AWS?
AWS.
It's about speed.
Okay.
People want speed when they access their applications. The first rule in software and apps is speed.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody comes to your website and it takes longer than 2.5 seconds to load, 2 seconds,
Yeah, it's torn down.
they're out.
Mm-hmm.
People don't have like time to wait for that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think blockchain has its purposes, but this idea of building the internet on blockchain doesn't for what? Like for what? Like what's the purpose?
Do you think that the whole issue around whether it be and maybe we can discuss this to the next issue in terms of the influence some of these social media companies have with regards to the access to information, and not just that, but the finance models, and the idea is that people want to mass adopt cryptocurrencies over time. I think most people in the tech community, or if you have some sort of like different cultural or political mindset, you want to sort of decentralize the idea that these currencies can be, or this idea that the US dollar or some country, some national currency is being the fiat currency for the global market. Don't you see the traditional models, or these traditional establishment sort of models, hindering that process? And as a result, the blockchain company, or you see some of these new serial whiz kids or tech entrepreneurs investing more time heavily into like an alternative solution. I understand that the first iteration of this is going to be pretty crap, considering how the internet started. And if you have like the traditional internet as already being super quick, fast, efficient, getting results, it's a higher chance that the alternative tech revolution or Web 3.0 has a hard time for customer acquisition. But do you see that kind of happening, or what's the solution to some of these like more establishment problems that we're seeing in today's world and these calls for?
Well, when you have an empire,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing you have to do with your empire is you first have to build walls, right? Otherwise, people come crashing in, right? So let's call that an enemy. The enemy of cryptocurrency are the financial legal bodies, without saying any names, right? So before you start building these technologies, you need to play some defense. I always ask people this: where is the legal body to defend cryptocurrency?
There ain't any.
Exactly. So you can build all this technology all you want, but all it takes is a stroke of a pen to make that stuff illegal or regulated. We just had recently the Yellen lady.
Janet Yellen, yeah.
Okay, what she said? She wanted to clamp down on the cryptocurrencies.
Go on a global scale, like forget just being the Treasury Secretary, like on a global scale, cooperating with other nations. Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay.
So you can build technology all you want, but if it's outlawed, then you're just breaking the law. Technology is going to be cool or whatever, but you're breaking the law at that point. So, what'd you say?
Yeah. So, do you see that maybe? But we do have to acknowledge that there is some sort of problem with some of these centralized models that we're seeing, right? These sort of elements of the so-called old world, of this establishment on all fronts. So they're not just politics or media, but this idea that every single form of how we've done transactions, in this case, the financial system with these big banks and these central banks, is being able to screw people over with cronyism, right? This idea that there is insider deals happening just because government officials are just in walking steps of all these major legislators. And in Canada, we have the Parliament. In the United States, you have the Congress, or in London, you have Westminster. This idea that this establishment, or the so-called these so-called old traditional models that have always been, I guess, the root cause, and the fact that there are people who are just trying to prop these traditional models up, keeping them kind of stagnant, right? Because there hasn't been massive growth in terms of quality of life overall. Of course, there has been, but I don't see that. I understand why these traditional areas of disciplines or whatever, they don't want to have the mass adoption of these because it disrupts them, and they hate disruption because it's been working for them. So we have to acknowledge that there is a problem. Now the question is what the solution is. I mean, we saw one of my notes here, I'm saying we saw the deletion of this other alternative social media app, Parler, as quickly in terms of like just overnight, and how like immediately they were wiped off the face of the earth. And then you see like these talking heads on Fox News, and the CEO comes along and he's like, oh, like they censored me. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it kind of makes sense. I mean, you really didn't have any base. I mean, you were built on an Amazon service. So when Amazon bans you, they're every right to ban you because you're built on their service. And if you want, you can be smart about it and invest in entire, like your servers or databases in a physical location. But my question is, do you believe that these, whether they be the tech companies or the issue of big tech monopolies, where do you, I know I've seen some of your interviews and you've kind of taken issue to that, but where do you see the solution to that? Do you see it as being a blockchain revolution as a answer to that? Or do you see a more cultural thing where we have to begin to talk about culture?
When you talk about blockchain, don't you need a server?
Yeah.
All right. So forget the blockchain, you need your own servers.
Okay.
Doesn't matter what technology you throw on them things, but you need to control your servers.
Okay.
And whether you use, whatever database you decide to use, database technology you decide to use is, arbitrary at that point. But when we look at, something like Parler, for example, Gab was first, right? And Gab was the first one to be banned from the Apple Store, Google Store, Stripe, PayPal, completely banned from all of these. So Andrew Tobler started building infrastructure from the ground up, his own payment processes, started using cryptocurrency, bought his own servers, still buying servers, right? So the question is, why did Parler exist? If there was already an alternative free speech platform, why did Parler exist? And if Parler existed, why didn't they go the route of Andrew Torba, knowing there's a potential for censorship, even when people warned them?
Yeah,
right. It's another story for another day.
Yeah, for sure.
But my point is, it's about control, right? People use this term decentralization and centralization. At the end of the day, all these technologies are centralized. Who runs Bitcoin?
The consensus network, or whoever's behind them, right?
Who makes the decisions for the protocol?
Those group of people, the miners, the people who verify or do the proof of work. Yeah.
Well, the miners don't got power. The miners don't have the power. It's the people that choose to run the software, right? But you got like Blockstream and these other big conglomerates that get huge financing. So the power is essentially centralized anyway. Right?
Okay.
Then you have a cryptocurrency pop up. These currencies are centralized. There's one company that's making the decisions for these things. And the miners contribute because they see some profits. They're basically workers. Right? But then you talk about this decentralization stuff. That stuff is what people need are options. You know, when you're saying decentralized, what you're saying is that people aren't locked into one currency. We can trade all different types of currencies. It's a decentralization of having a one currency.
Okay.
You know, but you know, I don't really pay much attention to this term of decentralization and centralization, because at the end of the day, it's one governing body making calling the shots for Ethereum, calling the shots for Bitcoin, calling the shots for BCH, calling the shots for BSV. You know, Calvin Ayer and the other idiot. You know, so you know, I don't really get into likes of those things. What I get into is purpose and the goals, the personalities behind them. But again, it's the diversification that we have to talk about.
Okay.
Diversification of currencies, which is, I think, beautiful.
Okay. Makes sense. I wanted to switch in terms of we spoke about two things right now in terms of culture, and you spoke about the idea of these social media companies, particularly in context with Parler. I think from an outsider's perspective, I think one of the things that we try to tackle here on the Gen Z, on the New World podcast, particularly with our audience, is to make sure that people who use social media, particularly Gen Z, or just the concept of the mainstream media in general, has always been, I guess, has been assumed as being sort of the gold standard for news. The idea that anything that comes out of some people's talking heads' mouth is somehow gospel, and that we have to stick with it. And if we question it, the idea is, well, you're someone on the fringe, not just politically, but you're fringe in general. Like if you're questioning whether some decisions that were made by governments or by particular people, or some news story that doesn't really make sense and is not really reporting on some of the biggest issues that we have. And I think it goes back to maybe my whole philosophy about being a problem solver. And as you mentioned, the idea is not just to pursue certifications or not just to pursue positions. It's the idea of taking a problem, solving it, building your purpose around it. So I wanted to talk to you about the power of podcasting in particular. So I think in the past 5 years, we saw, and I'm a big believer in this, we saw the collapse, I think, of the mainstream media. And I think we're witnessing it right now. And I think what 2020 did was, I think, sort of exasperate all these trends that were happening, these industries, these so-called old institutions, old ideas that were dying, and they were just like exasperating them. They accelerated them even further. And I think what's happening now is you're seeing this sort of propping up, this artificial kind of keeping them up above the water before they drown. Do you see, and then maybe you might agree or disagree, do you see that, like we know that podcasting is getting more views than some of these media channels, right? We know that more and more Gen Z and more young people are getting their information from social media. Now, as we just made the argument that the solution has to be whether or not you are able to diversify your options of where you get your news. And these companies, these competitors who are complaining so much about these, whether they be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and how there's like censorship on these platforms, the question has to be about positioning yourself to have access to the consumer. At the end of the day, the game is about customer acquisition, right? The idea that these platforms are able to put these customers on there, despite the whole talk of, hey, there's censorship, hey, there's this, hey, there's that. They still have the customer at the end of the day. They still have the people on their platform. So like you said, the goal is to get the person on your platform at the end of the day. But from a cultural perspective, do you see podcasting as being in a unique place, as being sort of the answer to the media narrative? Because for the longest time, the culture has always undergirded politics, tech, the direction that we've moved in. Do you see podcasting, like someone like a Rogan, for example, getting millions of views in comparison to, I mean, my parents, we watch every single day in our household, we're watching CNN. We see the Don Lemons and the Chris Cuomos of the world getting more views than those type of people on media. Do you see that? Do you see the podcasting and this what I mean by decentralization essentially as the death of the establishment and the birth of something new because there's more eyeballs moving towards podcasting?
Yeah. It allows people, here's what I say. When we think dystopian future, if you do not have a microphone and a camera, you won't exist. So when I think about podcasting in the dystopian future, I see it as that it allows people to have a voice and an opinion. Without your own platform, you won't have a voice and you won't have an opinion. So I think of it as, even if we go extreme to some sort of zombie apocalypse, having that radio, right? It's very important for communication, right? But I think everybody is a signal. All these different podcasts are a signal. And what you have is the choice. See, with media, you don't have big media, you don't have a choice, right? You're getting the same thing from basically two different networks, left and right. And both of them are lying to you or telling you half truths, right? Or bigger than telling half truths and lies is misdirection. Talking about something over here when they should be talking about something over there, right? That's what's really more important. They control the conversation. With everyone having their signals, you get to choose the conversations you tap into. And that allows diversification of thought. So with the diversification of opinion, there's a diversification of thought. And that's the problem with censorship, because when you start censoring yourself, you start censoring thoughts. It starts squeezing your creativity and so on and so forth. But when I think about podcasting, I just think about choice.
Okay.
Right? People have a choice of who they get information from, who they get to decide who they trust. A lot of people glue into Hoteps been told you because they say, this is the most honest take I'm going to get from anywhere.
Yeah.
There's no agenda, right? The only agenda we have is to build a great Hotep nation, right?
Yeah.
But as far as the message we put out, it's not about telling you what to think. It's more about telling you to think. But I was on Clubhouse and opened up a room once, and the guy was like, yo, like out of everybody, all the podcasts, like this is the one that's the most honest and brutally honest. So I saw people glue into us. It's going to become politically incorrect. It's going to be funny. So it's not going to, that's another problem, like the news, it weighs you down, right?
Yeah.
You feel sick afterwards.
Yeah.
And it makes you more susceptible to viruses, mental and physical. So with our podcast, we increase the vibration of the body, give you a more high vibrational feel. You get to laugh, you get to smile, you get informed, you get to learn, you get all of that good stuff, but you get a very honest opinion. We're going to tell you both sides, how it looks on both sides of the coin, and then let you decide what you want to do from there.
Yeah.
And that's quite different. Whereas some of these people with podcasts, they're too afraid, or they want to be fence sitters, or they won't touch certain subjects, right? So yeah, we give you podcast gives you options.
I think I completely agree with the idea that the media, whether it be like you're feeling sick after watching them, or you feel depraved about like the future, or you just feel depraved in general that the world's going to end.
Like for example, the Black community was complaining about the Grammys and what's the other one, the Oscars, and they said, "Oh my God, Grammy's so white, Oscars so white," or something like that. And what did the Hoteps do? We created our own award show. The Grifties.
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like,
That's been pretty funny.
like, why are you complaining about somebody else's award show? It's their award show.
Mm.
You're trying to force your way into their spaces.
Yeah.
If every year they don't give you an award,
Mm-hmm.
why are you still looking for one?
Very true.
They're telling you in so few words,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to recognize you.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
Your desire to be seen is what gives them power and validates them.
Mm-hmm.
Invalidate them. It is your black work that's making them money.
100%. Yeah, for sure.
So take that away.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? You know, Dame Dash created his own platform that could rival Netflix. Put your stuff there. I understand that, you know, Netflix has a much bigger reach, you know, absolutely. Yeah. I totally get it. But still, like, why are you looking for awards? You know, like, I remember I used to think in my head, like, damn, like, nobody bring me on their podcast, nobody interviewed me and all that stuff. But I didn't complain about it. You know what I used to say? I just say, it's something I have to do better. It's something I need to do better. So I just built my empire. Just built myself up to the point where they can't ignore you. Be so great, people can't ignore you. Now, I was on Fox News one time. They haven't had me back yet. I ain't complaining.
Yeah.
But it's validation for me. It says, maybe I'm a little too smart for that platform. Maybe I'm a little too honest for that platform, which lets me know I belong there. But I made Joe Rogan, and he's got a far bigger reach than all these people.
Yeah, for sure.
100%. And he comes with more respect than being on some of these platforms. Besides, the audience that's on this TV ain't my audience. If you're watching that stuff, you're definitely not ready for me.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
You know, so I just think about ownership, man, and power.
Yeah. I think that sort of relates to the last two themes that we want to talk about here, which is based off the way you're positioning sort of answers in terms of that you're coming from a more market-based approach. The idea of like a free market, or the idea of the market being your solution, rather than pointing fingers at some government building or some government institution, and this idea that like, okay, hey, you know what, let's create like a doctrine, and then let's give this to someone, and then let's elect someone in power, and then wait for like the entire machine to work, and then over time, maybe with the 1% of a chance, you might get like an extra dollar. Like this doesn't make any sense. And I think that's one of the ideals that we've been trying to push here, which is like Gen Z, by their orientation, has the most closest generation that you can compare them to is the millennials. Now, I can assure you, I'm not really related to any millennials, in the sense that the ones I know are constantly talking about how, well, we need to do X, Y, and Z, but we need to do that in partnership with a government or with some established sort of building, some brick and mortar. And this is how we're going to achieve the utopia on Earth. And my whole thing is, if that's the case, why don't you just is anyone pointing a gun to your head to not do this? Then that's the issue. But if there's no one pointing a gun to your head, do you have access to capital? Well, not you personally, but can you get access to someone if you want to create a cohesive community? Do you have access to someone who has this capital? If the answer is yes, you can go for that. And so I think that sort of ties into maybe your opinions on like libertarianism, this idea that like, you know what, you're basically,
I mean, you don't have much time left. And that's what they want to do. They want to distract you with their games, have you running around requesting stuff from them, which again validates them. In the meantime, when you could be building, soon it's going to be illegal to have your own stuff. Just like communist Russia, when Lenin took the people's property, you know, he said, oh, this is for the proletariat. And then the proletariat's farms were taken from them. Yeah. Right. Like that's what's going to happen here. So soon it's going to be too hard to even be an entrepreneur. So instead of complaining, you better go get what you can get now so that you have enough power to stop what's coming with the coming revolution.
Yeah, to utilize as leverage for sure, 100%.
Yeah, we don't got much time left, man.
Yeah, and I think that even translates to the as you mentioned, the power of like the power of building your own capital. This idea that like I almost sort of want to transition in terms of the so-called idea of like utilizing new ideas to actually tackle some of the old world's problems. Like some of these things that even I can list into the top of my head, these areas within some of our societies in Western society, we have some of these, you know, so-called like low income neighborhoods or these, some of these problems that we're seeing the media talk about even though I 100% agree, they're not even covering any of the world's most prime problems, surprisingly. I mean, like, it doesn't make sense to me. Of course, it makes sense as to why they wouldn't, but whatever. Um, the idea that they're saying that this is a problem, all they're suggesting to you is they're putting some sort of talking head on TV that says, you know what, we should do this. And it's like, well, I mean, these are solutions that have been tried over and over and over again. Like, if the answer really was more government control, you're not even talking about, forget that. You're not talking about civil society. You're not talking about entrepreneurship. You're not talking about letting the private sector maybe come up with a solution where the ideals of methods of transaction are money. There's capital. This is what's the financial incentive is there. Forget the social incentive. Doesn't matter if you think the person's greedy. Doesn't matter. Like, the world is moving on the financial incentive. Whether you like it or not, it's going to leave without you. So do you think that the power of capital is underrated? This idea of taking stuff into your own hands and kind of building your communities up. If that's the issue, if the issue that you're considering from your first principles is, okay, if I'm a member of an ethnic minority, let's say, for example, and I believe X, Y, and Z, that these people have been my people or my community has been disenfranchised, the idea is that you're not living in a society where your access to capital has been limited. If that's not the problem anyway. Your problem is, from your perspective, you see something missing. And so if your access to capital is there, as long as your access to capital is there, hey, you can do whatever you want with that. So do you believe that's some of these solutions that some of these problems that we're facing, especially in 2020, where we saw the middle class is struggling, where we saw some of the collapse of, we saw a really hyper polarizing society. We saw the whole Trump phenomenon. Do you see the solution to this being more really, like, not just grassroots, but individually led? Like, stop thinking as a hive mind, like get up, you're interested in a particular topic, like you said, explore it, research it, study it, find your space in it, find your blue ocean in comparison to like a red ocean with all these like titans and tech titans or whatever. Find your blue ocean, tackle that problem from a grassroots level, and then the financial incentives will come. They will follow you, and boom, that's how you build not just your empire, but your brand, your startup, whatever the case may be. Do you think that's really underestimated? And if that's the case, do you believe that's what people should be looking towards for building their?
I don't think it's underestimated. I think they want people to think they want to put this perception that it's underestimated. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why people are coming to America, and it's because they understand the power of capital. Mm-hmm. Right. This is why we have such great immigration. Mm-hmm. They want you to believe. You got to remember, the people on Twitter, for example, represent a small minority. Mm. Of people in the real world. Mm-hmm. The Black opinion on social media is controlled. It's controlled through peer pressure. Oh, the common thought is created and crafted by the communists. And the communists hire their useful idiots, which are your blue check Negroes, your pundits, your journalists, your entertainers. Okay, cool. Look at Ice Cube. Ice Cube doesn't co-sign Trump. He just says, I want to have a talk with the Republican Party, since they're in power now, about reparations for Black people. And what happened to him?
Yeah, he got slammed by a lot of people, actually.
Okay, he got slammed. He's not vocal before. I mean, he's not vocal as much as he was before. Every week he was putting out a video, he's talking. In fact, he basically gave up. He said, man, I'm done with y'all. Forget y'all. Y'all got it, right? So the Black thought online is controlled through peer pressure. That doesn't mean that's how everybody thinks. It's just that people are hushed to be quiet. Mm-hmm. They might think a certain way, but they won't tell you because they're afraid of getting canceled. That's what makes me unique. I ain't afraid of them.
Yeah, even if I came along, even hearing you on Rogan, some of the opinions that some of the concepts that you were talking about, to me even seemed really fringe. I've never even heard anyone, forget the race, anyone talk about certain things. Or maybe it's the idea that I think that's what you're espousing, which is the idea that it's you at the end of the day. Like collectively, like just as collectively, you don't feed yourself. You feed yourself.
Yeah.
You don't work in a group mentality. You're not thinking as a hive mind. People have the right. I think people need to, maybe that's the mind shift change that people should be more.
Well, you said it before. It's about understanding the market, right? What I understand about the market is that the market doesn't have one brain, right? Just because there's a whole side of Twitter that says I'm wrong means there's a whole nother side that says I'm right.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure.
So I could just focus over there. You know, hundreds of million people exist on Twitter, right? That's a big world.
100%. Yeah.
That's a big world, right? So I said to myself, I said, just because there's a lot of people that are against me, this means there's millions to still be accessed. Right? There's still millions of people to still be accessed that are looking for. So I just focus it over there. Oh, you don't like how I think? That's cool. What you think about me is none of my business.
Yeah, it's a free market. Hey, do whatever you want.
Yeah,
for sure.
You know, but again, you know, I grew up never being afraid to be canceled. You know, in high school, it was like, you know, you can't be different. I never operated like that. Oh, you think I'm different? Cool. I'm going to double down on it then. And I was always known as that kid who never went along. Oh, everybody going left? I'm going right because I think left is wrong. And I got respect for that. Might not be liked, but I got respect. And when I was right, everybody flocked to me afterwards. You know, and in the back of the mind, even in high school, in the back of everybody's mind, they knew I was the cool one. They'd say it secretly. They talked to me secretly. But again, peer pressure, afraid of getting canceled by the greater group for fraternizing with this individual because he thinks different from the rest. And so I've been trained to, you know, from high school. Just my dad taught me always go your own way, always be a leader, never be a follower. So I was always like that, you know. So when you know, when I see people and you know, they have this, you know, people say, oh, this is how the Black community thinks. No, that's not how the Black community thinks. The Black community does not think how you see it online. That's just the only opinion they allow you to see. Why is it I've been canceled by all Black media? Why did Ebro come out on Twitter and say I'm blackballed from Hot 97, but yet he follows me on Twitter and interacts with me on Twitter, but I'm not allowed at the #1 hip hop station in New York and I'm Black?
And you have an impressive resume. You've worked with some of the biggest Black creators, some people that even I listen to. It's like there's really nothing there in terms of like a skill set argument to be made. Yeah,
I'm more than qualified to be on that platform, but I'm not allowed to. I'm not allowed. Roland Martin will talk about me, but won't bring me on his platform. But he'll talk about me all day and lambaste me and criticize me all day. But they won't spar with me mentally. Why? Because they can't allow their audience to be exposed to a different type of idea because they'll leave his platform and come to mine. Because they're going to say, yo, he kind of makes more sense. That's what happens. People hear things about Hoteps, then they listen to one episode and they go, yo, everything was a lie. This guy's making sense. So they have to hide minds like mine because we'll change people.
And are you optimistic? Are you optimistic about the near future?
I'm optimistic about myself and my potential and the potential of my team
to deliver.
Yeah. When we think about the future of America, and this isn't ego or narcissism speaking, Hotep Nation is the last hope. It is the last hope. We've watched so many people on the right, leaders, fail us, give us poor opinions over the last 4 years. We know the opinions from the left are garbage. And people are starting to see like, yo, the Hotep's been right all along. Oh, it's not because we're miraculously better. We're just more honest. See, these other people you've been following behind have been grifting. They've been following the agenda. They've been thinking about themselves. Hoteps ain't thinking about ourselves. We consider ourselves. But we're here for the well-being of the planet. So you asked me if I'm optimistic about the future. I'm optimistic about my potential and the potential of my team and all the individual members of my team. And we're going to save the world. We're going to save America in conjunction with other groups like libertarians and anarchists. I'm not saying they have to become Hotep. I'm not saying that. I think it's the fact that Hotep Nation is so malleable that we're willing to work with
solid
groups.
hive mind thought. It's more like you acknowledge that you're Brian, there's another person in your team, this is him. We collectively agree on a goal. We all have different skill sets. I'm as you, the head of the brand, as you mentioned, the idea is not to just work at a company, but if you want to be the leader of that company, surrounding yourself with smart people in different areas to accomplish the goal. Yet at the end of the day, acknowledging that I am indeed myself. And
let's look at some of these brands that have grown over the years. Some of the biggest personalities. Where's their team? When you look at Hotep Nation, why is it that Doe Dubes has come to Hotep Nation and he's financially independent? Why is Uncle Hotep financially independent? Why is Hotep Cote d'Ivoire financially independent? Why are we all business owners? Why do we have cash flow? Why are we investors? Because Hotep Nation ain't about Hotep Jesus. It's about empowering every single individual to be a king. So we can be a kingdom of kings. Because then you are unstoppable. You see, most people, they just want others. They just want all the clout themselves. I don't want all the clout myself. I'm going to get clout because I'm me. I don't need to hog it and hoard it. And that's what these other people do. These other organizations, they hog and hoard the clout for themselves, but they've built no one around them. Who have they built around them? I'm in the, you know, you look at Hotep with it. I mean, his brand has grown. He's going viral. His YouTube channel's popping. He'll be cash flowing crazy in the next couple of years. He'll be an investor year. Look at Black Mile Hotep doing great things out in Colorado with his activism. Right? We're a conglomerate of great minds. So, you know, I'm about empowering other people so they can grow and be above me. I got one guy that bought my book, Dominate Twitter. He makes more money than me. He made close to $1 million so far.
Wow, that's amazing.
Right? About to be a millionaire with my strategies. That's beautiful. I need you to make 10 million so I can ask you for $1 million. Right?
For sure.
But that's what it's about, man. It's about building people, building great individuals. But again, instilling those values. The values of not seeking to argue, seeking to understand and listen. I don't argue. I listen and I understand. I give my point of view. If you don't like it, cool. I'll agree to disagree. But that's where it starts, you know, being religious tolerant. People ask me, what religion do you guys follow? Pick a religion. I love them all.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
Being a student. Following the 10 Hotep commandments.
For sure. Yeah. I think before we end in terms of our 3 takeaways, I think what you just mentioned there, which is amazing, which is this idea that for some odd reason, it seems as though, and I know I asked you about the future, and I know you answered for yourself, but it seems as though many people, some of our listeners, our viewers might be thinking like, okay, you know what? Like it seems as though it's become counterproductive. It's like 2020, or they'll say, for example, like 2020 has been such a bad year, and you know, like it's like where we have to think in collectives and in these sort of solutions that we have to propose for our futures and the way we should be thinking. It's like there's a sort of orthodoxy to the way they think, even though for many they assume that the ideas that they're espousing are some unique, never seen before.
The biggest opportunities is in tragedy. Think of how many people got rich off of selling toilet paper and hand sanitizer and generators. And, you know, when the pandemic hit, I was selling immune booster packages. Right? So, you know, I'm a survive in any weather. For sure. I prefer the chaos. The chaos happens to be more lucrative.
I think that's literally just a mindset shift. It's this idea that like people for the longest time are like, hey, that's unfair. And I'm like, when you think about it, like if you let's start being objective about the way we see the world. You know, like
Yeah.
let's start looking at facts. Let's start. If you we all agree that the purpose of life for most people is this idea to approach things, problems, find first principles, approach problems, solve them, go on living your life. If part of your life is about dealing with the questions of greater significance, we've dealt with that as a civilization, as human civilization for thousands of years, religion, spirituality, whatever the case may be. It's just that let's approach them from this idea of, like, let's say what has worked, keep that, maximize that, and then use that to build new ideas, new institutions on top of those, rather than just thinking that.
Can we walk down this economic thing real fast?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Toilet paper, hand sanitizer, for example. Let's talk about hand sanitizer. Mm-hmm. They wanted to fix the price on hand sanitizer. Mm-hmm. Right? They told, even on Amazon, no price gouging. Mm-hmm. Right? It's terrible for the economy. It's terrible for people who need products. What you have to do is you have to allow the prices to rise to extreme levels. Why? Well, it creates competition. Mm-hmm. People go, oh, this is a lucrative industry to make money in because prices have risen and people. Then what also happens, it allows time for the supply to stabilize. When they fixed the prices, what happened? Everything was sold out. So now you can't even get hand sanitizer.
Exactly. And the demand surging, like that's.
And then the demand surging, right? Had you let the prices rise, the supply would have been able to stabilize and it wouldn't have been sold out. Mm-hmm. It would have cut shit. The fucking supply might have stabilized to the point where the prices might have been lower than what the old industry average was. Mm-hmm. Right? But again, this is the problem with people in the economics. That's why I say you have to let the market be the market. Let it do what it do. Here's another thing that'll happen. Let's say they said, oh, but prices get to the point where nobody can get hand sanitizer. Okay, cool. What is hand sanitizer made out of? Alcohol. Cool. Did you know you can make gel? Did you know you can make alcohol? You've just now empowered some lady to start making hand sanitizer out of a house. Mm-hmm. There's rubbing alcohol on the shelf.
Yeah.
Right? So you could have grabbed some sea moss, turned that into a gel, or grabbed some sort of plant, turned it into a gel, mixed it with the rubbing alcohol, and now you got your own even better version of it. And now you could have provided that to the community. Now you've empowered the small person.
Exactly. And the price per unit is like significantly lower. And you're in the grassroots. You live in a neighborhood, even if like in an apartment complex, knock on doors and say, hey, I know you're scared. I'm selling sanitizer for like 75% the price. And it costs literally like nothing to make. So here, and literally you empowered individuals, not just that, the word gets out that this person's selling sanitizer in the community. We all want to support small business now. Yeah. You create a person, then they're like, holy shit, I need more labor.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want to come work with me?
Yeah.
Exactly. See, this is idea.
Innovation. All of it.
Sure.
Exactly.
Sure. It's individuals at the end of the day. Yeah. So we have like a recurring segment on the show where we ask our guests to give our audience, our Gen Z audience, 3 takeaways. These takeaways could be anything from technical, your 3 universal truths, or 3 pieces of advice that you want people to remember you by from this interview. So, Mr. Hotep Jesus, what are your 3 takeaways?
Number 1, spend time with kids. There's a lot of kids out here that don't have mentors. You know, we talk about, fatherless homes and whatnot, and just spend time at orphanages, go there and spend time with kids. A lot of kids that don't have people. So if you're a 20-something person, 18-year-old person, something, spend time being a positive influence on kids, especially when you don't have kids. If I didn't have kids, I'd spend a lot of time doing that. One of my big dreams is to open up an orphanage, a state-of-the-art orphanage. 2, be an autodidact. We talked about these certification programs, and that information's free on YouTube. Some guy trying to monetize a playlist right now that's got the same information. do the whole thing and then reach out to them. You can intern with the guy who created the YouTube channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And say, hey, I'll trade, services for your YouTube channel, whatever, if you teach me this coding thing that you were talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
3, build your own. Build your own, man. Focus on building your own.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And with that amazing note, we would like to end the interview there. Thank you so much for giving us your time. It was truly an honor and experience. And thank you to the audience for listening this week. We'll tune in next week for the next episode of the New World Podcast. See you guys. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share. Check us out for an audio-only experience on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other outlets. Follow us on all of our social media, and please consider supporting us on Patreon. All of these links will be in the description. That's it for us today. Welcome to the New World.